Welcome to Weekend Ag Matters from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. Join us for an in-depth look at Iowa agriculture. Here's your host, Mark Magnuson.
Hello and welcome into Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Mark Magnuson. In today's episode, Riley Smith speaks with Dan Bjorklund of Landus Cooperative. Dustin Hoffmann provides an update on New World Screwworm in the United States, and Russ provides his faith-based segment. Let's turn our attention now to this week's news headlines. Senate Ag Chair John Boozman says that the work on a bipartisan farm bill is about to yield results. Boozman says that the high prices of fertilizer and diesel fuel, labor and interest costs are all necessary reasons that farm policy needs to be updated and modernized.
We have a tremendous opportunity before us to update farm policies in Farm Bill 2.0. I look forward to releasing text very soon that incorporates many bipartisan measures and, just as importantly, the priorities of farmers.
Ranking Member Amy Klobuchar says recent Farm Bill talks have been productive, but the elephant in the room remains SNAP cost shares by individual states.
I think people made it clear they're concerned about the inequity of the SNAP shifts to the states, with the big error rate states getting off for 2 years and then the entire Midwest not.
Ag Democrats argue that the administration's tariffs and the war with Iran have fueled farm income losses and farm bankruptcies. USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins says in response that the tariffs brought 19 new trade deals and the ag trade deficit has been slashed nearly in half.
Corn exports are going to be record-breaking. We expect a 35% increase in volume in corn exports. Dairy exports are going to be up almost 10%. Sorghum is going to be up almost 100%. Tree nuts up 11%. Ethanol up at least 11%, probably more. Wheat exports are up 8%. Soybean oil up 129%.
House Ag Committee Republican from Arkansas, Rick Crawford, recently asked for support from USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins to help speed up ARC and PLC payments. Crawford says that payments can sometimes be delayed by up to a year.
I would say that if conditions are bad enough in a given year that they trigger a payment, that the payment is necessary in that year, not putting it off for 12 to 14 months.
Crawford told Secretary Rollins that he's pushing for legislation that will help to fast-track payments.
And so what I've sought to do is to actually create an opportunity for advanced partial payments for producers to help offset some of the interest expense associated with continuing to produce without those payments being made.
That is all the time we have for headlines this week. Let's turn things over now to Russ Parker and his faith-based Food for Thought segment here on Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, where Iowa Ag matters.
Do you know that June the 13th is National Weed Your Garden Day? According to my always reliable and true sources, Saturday of this weekend is the day to weed your garden. Truth be told, I don't like weeding. I think I was traumatized as a kid weeding my neighbor's rock garden. It was beautiful, situated on a hillside, maybe a quarter acre in size, with a waterfall. Beautiful plants, rocks, walls, and gravel paths, and a constant supply of weeds. I bet most of us have had some kind of experience with weeds in the garden, and of course, if they're not removed, the plants don't grow like they should. There are all kinds of strategies to solve the problem, like the rototiller. What a great tool. It gives the operator a feeling of almost supernatural power, right? Wow, turning up all those nasty weeds. Oops, just took out a row of carrots. Or maybe newspaper or plastic over the ground. A noble idea until somebody on social media warns that the ink from the newspaper or something from the plastic is going to end up in our vegetables. Yikes, does that carrot taste like ink? And then there's a non-selective herbicide that kills everything the spray touches. I'll admit it's my favorite way to weed my garden. I don't have to bend over. I can imagine those pesky weeds dying, and I'm not sweating. And then shoot, my wandering brain just pointed the spray tip into the grapevines, which were finally going to yield a crop this year. I'd venture a guess that if one was to observe National Weed Your Garden Day on June the 13th, it would not be much of a celebration. Taking care of weeds is not just a one-day event, is it? Most gardeners will tell you that a weed is simply a plant growing where it isn't wanted. In other words, it's something that competes with what you're actually trying to grow, and it steals water, nutrients, sunlight, and space from the plants that belong there. And that definition carries a pretty good life lesson. We all have things in our lives that compete for our attention, our time, our thoughts, and ultimately our relationship with God. Some are easy to identify, others are not. In fact, one of the challenges of gardening is knowing the difference between a weed and a plant put there on purpose. If you don't know what belongs in the garden, you won't know what to pull and what to water. The same's true in our spiritual lives. If we aren't grounded in God's Word, how do we know what we should cultivate and what should be removed? And weeds have another lesson to teach us. Pulling off the top isn't enough. If the root remains, chances are the weed will return. And the same can be said of our anger, our pride, resentment, greed, or any other number of things that take hold in our hearts. We can trim the symptoms for a while, but until we deal with the root, they keep coming back. That's why tending the garden for faith isn't something we do once a year or when the weeds become obvious. It's daily work, daily prayer, daily reflection, daily time spent with the Master Gardener. Food for thought, I hope. This is Russ Parker. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Russ. Up next, we will have Riley Smith's conversation with Dan Bjorklund of Landus Cooperative. That's next here on Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network.
Farmers, ranchers, and ag professionals, are you keeping up with the latest in agriculture? Profit Matters is here to help. Every weekday, we dive into the crop reports, market trends, and ag stories you need to stay ahead. From new technologies to shifts in policy, we cover the issues that matter most to your farm or business. We know agriculture is more than just a job, it's a way of life. That's why we're committed to bringing you the stories that matter and the information you need to make smarter decisions. Catch Profit Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, where Iowa Ag matters.
Welcome back to Weekend Ag Matters. Here's Riley Smith.
It is time now for a featured conversation with Landus Cooperative's Dan Bjorklund. Dan is a technical agronomist there, covering the entire state of Iowa. And first off, Dan, could you tell us the crop conditions that you are currently seeing across the state?
If you look at corn, I was just south of Des Moines in the Earlham area yesterday, and there's corn stage of growth there from V7 to V8, which, knee high. And I think even further south, for those individuals that were able to plant a little bit earlier in April, you could have it thigh high. So from that stage of growth all the way up to, last week I was in northern Iowa along the Minnesota border, and corn that was planted the first week of May, so planted quite a bit later, was maybe V4, V5. So there's a difference. Soybeans are really interesting because at this time of the year, soybeans are always just small. You've got a couple trifoliates, maybe 3 trifoliates in the Des Moines lobe, which runs through, the soil types through the center of the state. They have some higher pHs. You're starting to see some yellowing in those beans. Otherwise, things look fairly decent driving 55 mile an hour on the highway. If you get out into the fields, you see some scars from what happened in the planting season this year.
So when we think about how the weather has been, really Iowa has been pretty fortunate when it comes to rainfall for the most part. There are some dry parts of the state, but in general with the weather this year, has that been cooperative for the crop or how has that been?
It's been really interesting because March we had some 80s, and then April, right when we were getting ready to plant, we had rainfall and very cool temperatures throughout April. Some individuals were able to get in that window of April 14th a little bit, but then were rained out, and it really didn't open back up for planting until about the 19th or 20th of April. Some individuals, depending upon soil types, if they're a little bit heavier, maybe went a day or two too early, and we had some compaction. We had some seed furrows open back up, and you could see that occurring when we started getting some warmer temperatures in May. Those individuals that waited for the first week of May, really that corn, with the temperatures as they really accelerated into May after Mother's Day, the corn really caught up pretty fast. So this year was the year of planting in a seed bed that was ready to go, and some individuals did and some individuals didn't. And so you could see the you could see the impact of that. Overall, things look pretty decent now. We've had some rains recently that have helped the next 3 days. As long as we don't get the hail with it, we're supposed to get some decent rain. So I think we're heading into the season, heading into the middle part of June, pretty excellent condition. Now, there are a couple things that I could mention that could be problematic. Something that I've seen in soybeans earlier than I've ever seen before.
And then when we look at pest pressure as well, I actually heard some reports recently of some farmers dealing with armyworms already. But in general, for this time of year, do we expect to see many pests? And if so, have you heard about any damage across the state?
Well, yeah, in soybeans, I was looking at a field. We have a program called Sky Scout, and basically we use drones and planes and satellites. People subscribe to the system, and we get imagery on these fields every 2 to 3 days, and various different types of things that it's looking for. Weed pressure is one that I've seen heavy this year in both corn and beans, and I think it. You're talking about pests, and weeds are a different type of pest, but I've seen more challenges there, and I think it was because, for those individuals who planted, and then we had 2 or 3 weeks in May where it didn't rain, and so we didn't get the pre-emergence herbicide working as well. Now people are trying to get sprayed before the rains come through, but I've seen some of that in the imagery. I noticed something the other day in soybeans. This was on the 2nd of June, so it was last week. These yellow fields, I went out and looked some of these fields and dug up, looked at the roots, and I found soybean cyst nematode, the earliest I've ever seen it in the 47 years that I've been an agronomist. So I think the warm temperatures that we had really accelerated the development of pests. I've seen fireflies already, which is an indication that you've had enough heat units for rootworm larvae to start feeding in corn. Haven't noticed that yet, but that would be something that people could start looking for.
And then when we're looking at this year's crop, I mean, emergence-wise and just everything for that across the state, you touched on it earlier with like early planting and just how farmers were able to get in. How are we comparing to this crop the same time last year, and just historically in general? Are we ahead or behind?
I think that we're a little bit ahead. When you look at a lot of corn that went in the first week of May, whereas last year most of the corn was planted in April. But it seems like every year we get these cool periods where your time periods where you're not getting much growth. I did see those fields, as I mentioned, that were maybe planted just with the seed beds, just maybe a little bit early. There was some emergence challenges there. We had some corn that I call it leafing out under the ground. It was compacted on the surface, and we had some of that rain that came in April after planting, and then it dried out, and we didn't really have much rain the first 2 or 3 weeks of May. Those fields had to deal with some issues, so we saw some of that. So there are some fields out there. You don't see it from the road now, but you can see it from any stand counts that you took earlier. So we have that, and we have quite a few fields that look pretty decent. If the corn that was planted really the first week of May looks, those stands look like some of the best corn I've seen. And with the heat that we've had, most recently in the last 10 days, 2 weeks, really has helped things to actually get ahead a little bit.
And then one last thing, Dan, at this point in the season, what should row crop farmers be thinking about? I mean, I know before we know it, we're going to be hitting pollination. We'll be hitting all these different important stages. So what should be top of mind for those farmers?
If I'm in corn on corn, I always like to go out and dig up a few plants with the entire root ball, and take a bucket of water and put them in the bucket and see if we get any rootworm larvae floating. If you've seen 5 of those floating at the top, that's a concern. Not a lot of people have different ways of fighting this with traded corn and also using insecticide. But if you want to double check on a pest, we haven't seen huge challenges with fruitworm larvae the last 2 or 3 years, but I always want to check that. So that's one thing. If you have any yellowing in your soybean fields, I was out yesterday, in every area where I found those yellow pockets, I was able to find soybean cyst nematode. They're very small. They're about the size of the pinhead. They're white to yellow white, and compared to the normal nodules, they're much smaller. If you have those in your roots, you'll be able to see them. But in those areas of yellow, that's where I found those. That's another pest. As far as the disease goes, compared to what we dealt with last year with southern rust, that's all going to depend on environment. The next month. Obviously, the next month, how much rain we get, what the temperatures will determine those types of pests. But that's why I love the Sky Scout program that we have, because every morning I get alerts if there's something it's seeing, and that tells me where in the state to go and where in the field to look, because it's really impossible to cover an 80 or a quarter or anything by yourself. You actually need help. You need to be able to look at an image and look in those areas that just don't look normal in director scouting. And so that's what I'll be doing for the next 30 days.
And that again was Dan Bjorklund, a technical agronomist with Landus Cooperative. We've still got more to go in today's episode of Weekend Ag Matters. Coming up next, Dustin Hoffmann will wrap up the show as he learns more about the New World Screwworm situation with USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins. You're listening to Weekend Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. Stay informed with the closing market report from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, your essential summary of the day's market activities and their impact on the agricultural economy. Join us for timely updates and expert commentary on commodity prices and market trends, with trusted ag market analysts from around the Midwest. Tune in every Monday through Friday on your local Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network affiliate for your daily market recap and insights to stay ahead in the ag economy.
Welcome back to Weekend Ag Matters. Here's your host, Dustin Hoffmann.
New World Screwworm has quickly become one of the biggest animal health stories facing the livestock industry this summer. After multiple confirmed cases in Texas and New Mexico, federal officials have expanded surveillance and response efforts, while producers across cattle country are keeping a close eye on developments. This week, we covered both the federal response and what the detections mean for producers. Let's begin with the latest update from the USDA and Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins that started off the week. The USDA has continued to expand its response to New World Screwworm following a series of confirmed detections in Texas and New Mexico. What began with a single infected calf in South Texas last week has now grown to multiple confirmed cases involving cattle, a goat, and a dog believed to have recently traveled from Mexico. Federal and state animal officials have spent the past several days increasing surveillance, testing suspect cases, and establishing movement control zones around the confirmed detections. USDA says each new case triggers a response plan that includes quarantines, trapping efforts, wildlife surveillance, and outreach to livestock producers and veterinarians in the area. During a briefing Monday, U.S. Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins provided the latest update on confirmed cases and outlined the federal response effort.
On June 5th, we confirmed a second positive detection in a 30-day-old calf, also located just a few miles away in Zavala County. Yesterday, USDA confirmed 2 additional cases, one in Texas in a calf in LaSalle County and another in Lea County, New Mexico, in a dog that we are hearing has been moved up from Mexico. And today, we had an additional confirmation in a goat in Gillespie County, Texas. This morning, we received an update from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The massive facility we're building in Moore, the production facility. We broke ground just a couple of months ago, expecting to reach in the hundreds of millions of additional sterile flies by mid-next year. They have now put one of their top commanders on this as his sole project to help us combat the New World Screwworm. We are advancing our next generation tools and technologies. Last year, USDA launched our New World Screwworm Grand Challenge, investing up to $100 million in innovative solutions from the private sector to strengthen eradication efforts and expand sterile fly production. Later this week, we will begin rolling out more rapidly some of those innovations coming out week by week by week. The U.S. Livestock Insects Research Laboratory here in Kerrville are the teams that developed a novel strain for the sterile New World Screwworm that doubles production output that we will soon be deploying.
Again, USDA says the latest confirmed cases include a calf in LaSalle County, Texas, a goat in Gillespie County, Texas, and what is now considered the first New Mexico case after officials determined an infested dog initially reported in Texas actually resides in the Lea County, New Mexico area. Officials stress the detections remain relatively limited, but they continue to take the threat seriously because New World Screwworm larvae feed on living tissue, creating severe wounds that can lead to significant animal health and economic consequences if untreated. To combat the pest, USDA has deployed strike teams, mobile response trailers, diagnostic personnel, and treatment supplies to the affected areas. The agency's also increased sterile fly releases, a strategy that's been used successfully in previous eradication campaigns. Millions of sterile flies are now being released each week by both air and ground operations in and around affected regions. USDA has also activated operations at Moore Air Force Base in South Texas to support dispersal flights and is continuing to work on expanding future sterile fly production capacity. According to Secretary Rollins, new technologies and research breakthroughs could be further strengthening eradication efforts in the months ahead. Animal owners are encouraged to inspect livestock and pets regularly for unusual wounds, maggots, or signs of irritation and report suspected infestations immediately. USDA says the nation's food supply remains safe, and officials will continue providing updates as investigations and surveillance efforts move forward. While USDA continues its efforts to contain and eradicate New World Screwworm in the affected areas, many producers outside the Southwest are asking what the detections mean for their own operations. Veterinarians say awareness is important, but they also stress there's no reason for widespread panic. Here's a look at how the animal health experts and livestock marketers are viewing the situation. The confirmation of New World Screwworm cases in Texas and New Mexico has generated understandable concern throughout cattle country. The parasite was eradicated from the U.S. decades ago, making its reappearance a significant animal health event. However, veterinarians and the livestock industry leaders are saying producers should focus on vigilance rather than panic. New World Screwworm is caused by the larva of a parasitic fly. Unlike many pests that feed on dead tissue, screwworm larvae feed on living flesh, making infestations particularly damaging if they're not identified and treated quickly. While the confirmed cases remain concentrated in the South, experts say producers everywhere should be aware of the situation. Veterinarian Dr. Russ Daly says that there is an important distinction producers should understand about how the pest spreads.
They can fly long enough, don't get me wrong, 6 to 8 miles, but it's certainly not something where a screwworm fly from Texas is going to fly up to Nebraska or South Dakota and cause a problem.
Now, that doesn't mean that producers outside the affected region can ignore the issue. Daly says the greater concern comes from the movement of livestock. Every day, cattle are transported across state lines and through marketing channels that connect nearly every region of the country.
We move animals very easily and very readily, and at any given time, there's hundreds of thousands of cattle on the road, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that something could have been moved up from down in that area, and you don't even know that you moved it up here. So it's a reason for all of us to be vigilant, not just looking at Texas and saying, well, that's a problem down there, because like you mentioned, of all the animal movement, everybody needs to kind of have this in the back of their minds.
Animal health officials continue to work to contain the outbreak, and Daly says producers should remember that the cattle industry has dealt with challenging animal issues before. While New World Screwworm is serious, there are treatment options available and response plans already in place.
It's not something that is going to wreck the whole cattle industry in one fell swoop, but it is going to be something that I think is going to be a nagging problem. It's going to be, just given the geography, South Texas is a pretty widespread area, so it's going to be tricky to get rid of it. So it's going to be something we're probably going to have to live with for a while and deal with.
While veterinarians are emphasizing preparedness, those closer to the affected area say the producers have already begun adjusting to the reality of the situation. Ben Hale owns Western Livestock in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and says that the initial shock surrounding the first U.S. confirmation has largely worn off.
In my opinion, I'm just glad we got it over with. Now we can go on like we did with the mad cow deal. It got better after that, and we're already real good, but hopefully we got these different tools. That cattle people are already watching their cattle, and it's not a big calving season right now, so it's not a big bunch of them. So hopefully we can just stay diligent, and I think we can get ahead of it.
One area where that confidence is showing up is in the marketplace. Despite the additional confirmed cases, cattle prices have remained strong, and buyers continue to actively pursue cattle offerings.
Everybody's attitude's real good. They was real tickled yesterday with the way that deal was and that kind of popping up on those feeders, but we're going to be lighter. It wasn't very many years ago that June was always our big month. We'd sell 10, 15,000 a week. So it's been a shift in numbers. We can see that. We're seeing that everywhere, but the market's extremely stout. And even these calves are cheaper, but they're still dollar now extremely good per head.
For producers in the Midwest, the takeaway is relatively straightforward. New World Screwworm is a threat that deserves attention, particularly because of the movement of animals throughout the cattle industry. At the same time, veterinarians and livestock marketers say there is little reason for panic. The focus remains on monitoring cattle, identifying potential cases quickly, and maintaining the vigilance needed to keep the pest from gaining a larger foothold in the United States. The New World Screwworm remains a serious animal health concern, but officials emphasize that early detection, treatment, and continued vigilance remain the best tools available to prevent further spread. USDA said surveillance and response efforts will continue in Texas and New Mexico, while producers across the country are encouraged to monitor livestock closely and report suspected cases quickly. As always, we'll continue to follow developments and bring you the latest information as the story evolves. That is going to put the wraps on this week's edition of Weekend Ag Matters. You can find all our content online at iowaagnet.com. For Russ Parker, Riley Smith, and Mark Magnuson, we thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network.